This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Today's guest is just a special member of society, someone who's really up to what I think is extraordinary front edge contribution to the world around us. And although I'm just meeting him in the last month or so, having heard about him for really a few years that he didn't know about, there's a real opportunity today for me to introduce you to somebody who's just really making a difference in the world and really up to making a difference. I mean, we're going to learn more about what makes Tony Moss's heart sing today. And it is indeed my pleasure, my privilege, and my honor to introduce our listeners to each other, both Tony Moss and Fred Moss, for today's Welcome to Humanity episode. Welcome to the show, Tony. It is an honest pleasure to have you here.
It's an honest pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Just is, right? You know, even though we look a lot alike and stuff, I mean, if you take a picture, you could probably get us mixed up. There is an opportunity to really get that we're not, as best as we can tell, we're not related at the first level of separation anyways. But
exactly.
You know what, Tony, we really are related. And this is where a conversation went before, which isn't that Tony and Fred are related, but Tony and Fred are in this family of 7.8 billion people. And all of us are family. And I think we really start looking at that, you know, as a space to start from for both of us. Each and every one of us is really dealing with something, right? No matter whether we're tackling some of the big problems in the world or maybe even the tiny ones, we all face challenges. Now, I've been a psychiatrist for many years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I've worked with more people than I can really count, from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So naturally, over time, I've developed a number of ways to assist others in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. Now, I'm pulling back the curtain on one of those methodologies, and I'm going public, revealing the process and associated mindset that contributed to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in my new book called Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick this book up on Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. And as a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of Creative 8 today. I really look forward to hearing about your Creative 8 breakthrough. Now, let's get back to this amazing conversation. Welcome to humanity. Why don't we take this opportunity, Tony, to just answer the question I often ask to my guests, which is really a simple one. Three-letter words. Who are you? Who are you, Tony Moss?
Well, you know, you could spend a whole episode on breaking that question down. Yep. So I'll answer it in the most common way. So I am someone who has, at this point in their life, dedicated their life to what I consider the evolution of human consciousness. And I do that in all ways that I move in the world, musically, artistically, but specifically being a enthusiastic advocate for the decriminalization and use of plant medicines, and specifically ayahuasca, because that is the one I'm most familiar with.
So the decriminalization and what was the other word you said here?
Well, it comes down to right relationship use of, right? Mm-hmm. Decriminalizing plant medicines and returning them to their rightful place, you know, as allies that we have co-evolved with, in particular Western culture, because in lots of other places in the world, that relationship has never been lost.
Ayahuasca appears to be, that's your best friend of this bunch, of this family of psychedelics. That's the one that you're speaking towards or about today, or at least so far. So, you know, why did this stuff get criminalized in the first place?
You know, there's lots of multi-layered and related answers to that. I think the simplest and broadest answer that really covers the question is ignorance, you know, and fear. There was some intentional propaganda and misleading of the public early on by people who just misunderstood what the medicines were and what they were about. And also, there was some intentional manipulation and propaganda on behalf of major pharmaceutical companies and other special interest groups because, again, they didn't understand it, they couldn't manipulate it, couldn't patent it, and it just got grouped in with all other psychedelics and drugs during what we now call the drug war, and has only relatively recently been able to surface from that cloud, and be seen for what it actually is, which is a really powerful medicine for psychotherapeutic and spiritual work, which I tend to think are all the same.
Yes, I got it. I really do. And I really wonder, is there something? Well, first of all, before we split off into looking at how it is that it's resurfaced, but is there something special other than your personal relationship with ayahuasca, which I'd like you to at least take a moment with? Is there something special about ayahuasca in your world that separates it as a plant ally, as a therapeutic, indicated contribution to the humanity? Is there something special about ayahuasca that separates it from the other plant medicines and then the other laboratory medicines, MDMA, LSD, ketamine, those kinds of things?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the first really holistic answer to that is all of them have something special that separates them from each other, right? It's about, as you know, for the right medicine at the right time and place and diagnosis, so to speak. Ayahuasca is particularly profound because it consistently has, in ways that we don't fully understand, the ability to induce a spiritual experience that very often leads to healing of pretty consistently post-traumatic stress syndrome. There's ancestral healing that takes place. We can get into that later. Almost any dis-ease that is related to either the mind or, let's say, our neurological programming, depression, anxiety, all of those things. Ayahuasca just has this profound, amazing track record for healing that. And in the process of it, bringing people to a deeper sense of connection, which, I think beyond what people realize is what everybody's after and looking for these days.
Well, you use the word healing so freely when speaking of the impact that ayahuasca might have on, classical, conventional psychiatric conditions. You mentioned post-traumatic stress disorder or depression or anxiety. These are typically thought of as psychiatric problems, or even more so as psychiatric conditions or psychiatric diseases or syndromes or illnesses or malfunctions or dysfunctions or
right.
all of the above, right? I mean, they're all thought of as if those are just sort of off the rails, non-human, not necessarily human experiences. And then you mentioned healing them. So I wonder if we can take a peek here at getting both the piece that all these things are part of being human and nevertheless are subject to healing, and that ayahuasca brings some really unexplained magic to these conditions.
I love that question, and thank you for bringing it up. When people ask me, what is being healed in ceremony? Like, what is it that you're referring to, healing in quotation marks? If you've been suffering from long-term depression, anxiety, trauma, to the degree that it is interfering with your ability to function and live, a reasonably healthy, holistic life, then yes, you're looking for some kind of healing, right? To bring balance, right? Which you could say healing is in a lot of levels, something that brings balance back to your life. On a deeper level, I mentioned the word connection earlier. It's more profound, as most of the things are that are simple, so simple that it's overlooked. What ayahuasca particularly ultimately heals, and I'm now entering, as we're speaking, my 27th year of working with this particular medicine.
27 years.
Yeah, 27 years.
That's before I was born, Tony.
I can tell looking right at the pictures. And we look so much alike otherwise. There is this profound malady, I will call it, that is a particular plague for contemporary Western culture more than others. And I say that because it's the one I have the most dominant experience with. And that is this sense of separation, a sense of separation from each other, from our place in the cosmos, all of the ways that separation appears, which the result of is a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the challenges that we're facing in the world, right? If we didn't have this strong sense of disconnect, our behavior would look different. That is ultimately the thing that ayahuasca heals, and it typically brings balance to the other areas of your life. So it's a twofold kind of healing. There is a specific healing that you're looking for, which often happens, and there is a deeper sense of healing the malady, or I've used that word, or the challenges that come with feeling separate from everything ultimately.
Mm-hmm. So are you saying, I think I know this answer, but are you really just saying something as simple as sort of taking the step, for me, it's a risk, it feels like a risk to go out there and just like scramble my mind, or to undo what I think is so, or to, like reconstitute foundationally that which I think is what reality is, and then come back to a way of being that simply doesn't support the depression, anxiety, or trauma response that I had going in. And that even with one episode or with one ingestion, I can make a difference in those areas?
Yes and no. Mostly yes, with qualifiers. Even simpler put, ayahuasca hits the reset button. Most psychedelics do. Ayahuasca is just particularly consistent and safely consistent at doing so. And by hitting the reset button, really what we're talking about, using Western language and scientific kind of terminology, is it causes a disruption in the default mode network, meaning that part of your brain, which you're very familiar with, that your habitual way of being is anchored into, right? The groove that you are in every day when you wake up, the stories that you're telling yourself, the habits that you have, your conditional responses to familiar stimuli, and the way that we block out a lot of the environment as if it's like white noise, because we're really only focused on the things that are necessary for us to get through the day, or moment by moment. And in the process of that, we develop a lot of very sometimes unhealthy and unsatisfying habitual ways of being and habitual ways of seeing the world. What ayahuasca does is, for a period of time, it disrupts that completely. And the world I can't say the world as it actually is, but a lot of the world and ways of being and perceptions that have been kind of blocked by that default mode network can come flooding in. And you suddenly may see, quite literally, yourself and life in a whole new life, at least for a temporary period of time. But for a lot of people, that temporary interruption and kind of revelation of what's on the other side of that can be enough. For some meaning, like one weekend, right? For other people, yeah, it takes, it's such a great experience. You get a little bit of work done, maybe, and some insight, and then you get a really strong calling. I need to stick with this for 6 months or so, right? So it's different for everybody. What I can say is, consistently over the last 2 decades, it delivers. Yeah.
Yeah, this reset button, I have a little bit of experience with this particular plant medicine. I say a little, I think it's 3 separate times. And one of the things that I noticed in this reset button is that, Tony, it's not always comfortable, this ayahuasca. It's not a party drug, is it? It's not one that you just like ingest and then go dancing to the Rolling Stones or something. That isn't how this works.
For people that are unfamiliar with it, what you just brought up is one of the most important things to know, not only about ayahuasca, but plant medicines in general, is that one of the reasons they're non-addictive is that they're uncomfortable, right? We're talking about a challenge to your egoic structure, a challenge to reality, and oftentimes a very physically uncomfortable experience that definitely has a payoff. And there's definitely moments of bliss and beauty, and you can't imagine being any place else in the world because the experience you're having is so good. But the price you pay for that, is often very challenging work that, if you think about, it's been in your subconscious, tucked away and hidden and guarded, right? Sometimes for decades, if not a whole lifetime. And the mind doesn't easily open the doors to those experiences. There's usually some uncomfortable work in going into the subconscious, healing trauma and the root cause of addiction and anxiety, and where a lot of, and the maladies of diseases that result from that. So yeah, definitely not a party drug, and something that you have to be committed to and ready for.
Yeah, it's interesting. The dissociation that we're talking about here, when there's no escape, that there's no escape, that there's no escape. There's like, it's like, oh yeah, I think I've had enough. Enough of what? You haven't had enough, because there's not any measure of what enough is. There's nothing like, okay, I think I've had too much. Too much of what? What are you, like? okay, I don't think I've had enough. You don't think you've had enough of what? It's like there is nothing there.
And in that inquiry, the medicine, ayahuasca, the spirit of however you look at it, will ask you, who's talking?
Who's talking? Exactly. Who is this you that thinks you've had enough? There's also that.
Exactly.
And yeah, and the whole thing just dissolves. And it is in that emptiness that I think this comfort lies, sort of the chasm between how I thought things were going and how I'm now being shown that they're going, like almost at the mercy of, or at least in sheer reverence of, the things I've been doing that are inconsistent that might be inconsistent with, with an eternal truth or with an infinite truth or with with whatever this life is, these things that I have defined. Oh, yeah, this is what my life is. It's like, no, actually, this is not how your life is. It's not a done deal that your life looks like how you've been living it. And here you go, just showing you that on a silver platter.
Well, you're ultimately, referring to the death experience.
It really is the death experience. So thanks for taking us there. And
yeah,
I've gone here, but with a couple other recent guests. But the real question here, it is a death experience. And it's almost like at any given moment, there is an I here. There is something that's watching this happen or being subject to it happening. There's something.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, what you just brought up is fundamentally a Western misunderstanding that I have found. I don't know like how ultimately true this is. It's a Western misunderstanding of what the death experience is. The death experience is much closer to what you prefaced as part of our conversation with. It's a disassociation from life as you know it, meaning your ego, ultimately, that word, the E word, meaning, everything that you've been told so far, how you're navigating the world, your assumptions and perceptions, right? How you're processing the world. And more importantly, because of all of that, the identity, right? Your identity structure, who you think you are, your story, a word I use a lot, is what the death experience is, meaning that goes. And in the process of that, the ego does exactly what it's supposed to do. It tries to keep you safe and in that alert problem solving mode that it's good at, but it can't in that space. So what it typically causes in psychedelic and in plant medicine experiences is a fight or flight response.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The ego will interpret the death of its story as literal death, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that I that you brought up that is still watching, that's the authentic self. It's like, who is this observer and who's observing this observer on into infinity, right? Which is a beautiful place to be. It's just we're so unfamiliar with it in our culture that it brings up fear, if not just uncomfort.
Yeah. And I would go so far as to say that I think I told you this in our first call, which is, the most uncomfortable I've ever been, ever. Like by far. I don't even know what the second most uncomfortable I've ever been was during one of these ayahuasca rides where I just got, okay, just like sheer surrender that really, it seemed at the time, and I only have reference to it from here where my ego is, of course, actually fully intact. But it seems at the time, it was like sheer and total disassembled surrender.
Yes.
And from there, even the idea of, okay, now it's time to reconstitute doesn't work. There's no even place to reconstitute what? Right. It's like, there's not. And so there's this emptiness that stays empty. It's empty that it's empty that it's empty. And then it's not empty because, my goodness, those visuals they're intense. They're, really real. And they can be, and the music, the songs, the Akiros, is that what they're called?
Yeah.
Am I saying that right?
Ikaros. Yes, Ikaros.
Yeah, Ikairos. They're amazing, and they're always completely perfect to where I am second by second. So where is the work done? Is it done down in that hole, or is it done on the way back, on the way back to finding our way to this, to this three-dimensional astral plane, or what's happening?
It's all of that, and mainly because the key to plant medicine and psychedelic work is integration, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can have 10 full days of profound, amazing revelations, visions, and insights. Yet, if you can't find a way to integrate that into being a good human, right, then what was it all for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the work is in the maturity and discernment during the experience itself of being able to glean what part of that is beneficial and helpful, right? As opposed to just overwhelming and entertaining, right? And then, like, how do I integrate this? What part of this experience can I bring into how I'm living? Basically, like how I'm being in the world. That's the real work, you know. And I would expand on something, you know, when we talk about the throes of the death experience in plant medicine and psychedelic work. I've been looking the last couple of years, in particular during, you know, the last year, as we're recording this, we're coming up hopefully on the end of our COVID cycle. And one of the things that's apparent to me is this kind of death experience is what we're facing in humanity right now, in this broad sense. I think we're seeing a lot of different parts of evolution come to a head. You know, technological evolution, of course, the human evolution in terms of our psyche, and then what the Western culture's been about, and just all these different things are crescendoing. And in the process of that, the world is changing rapidly. And I find through the work that I do that a lot of people are basically up against a subconscious or very direct reality that the operating system they've been functioning on no longer works, if it ever did, right? And it's definitely not working in a world evolving and changing as rapidly as ours is. So I feel that's at the core of a lot of the cognitive dissonance and the way that's playing out in behavior with people, frustration, anger, you know, violence, all these things. I think it's a lot of people that, particularly in the West, I'll speak about, that just have not been prepared culturally, spiritually, to open up and receive, I think, a shifting reality in the way that it's coming. And plant medicine work, spiritual work, psychotherapeutic work, all of those things help you to let go of your rigid identity, default mode way of looking at reality, and gives you a place to stand and look and go, okay, so this is what I thought was going on. This is the story I've been living up to now. This is who I thought I was. But here's reality and the world the way it actually is. And we need to adapt and advance or not, right? Yeah.
Yes. So, yes, really, really well put. You're so articulate. It is a deep pleasure to really explore these things because isn't it true that the experience itself doesn't naturally lend itself to being spoken of using linear language, linear binary based, reason based,
right?
Consequential cause and effect based language streams they don't fit for that experience out there.
They don't, and that's one of the beauties of ayahuasca and in plant medicine work. At least it has just been used in indigenous cultures ceremonially for hundreds of years, if not more. One of the beauties of this kind of psychedelic renaissance that's happening and the global popularity of ayahuasca is that we're able to bring a Western lens and Western understanding of the psyche and all the language that comes with it. And the marriage of the two is actually really beautiful. There's even a spirit of a prophecy called the Eagle Condor prophecy, which basically is saying that during these times that we're in, the eagle, which represents Western culture, North America, which is a way of technology, the mind, and masculinity, has to fly together with the condor. And that South America, representing indigenous ways, representing the way of the heart, femininity, and of connectivity. And neither of them on their own, as we can see, if you're too much in the heart or too much in the mind, as you know, you have a problem navigating the world. But when you bring the heart mind together, a lot of people now are starting to call that heart mind coherence. That's what's happening with psychedelic in general, psychedelic as it's used for psychospiritual work, and with traditional plant medicines and the popularity or the resurgence of their ceremonial use. You're able to definitely maintain your understanding of Western science and what's that word? Ontology and cosmology, all of that is fine and left intact. But you suddenly get this return to this kind of planetary, some people call Gaian consciousness, where you literally feel like the planet, if not the cosmos, is speaking to you. And in that conversation, you realize, oh, wait a minute, it's not speaking to me as a separate thing. I'm it. Like, I'm part of.
Right.
Right. And I feel that's the thing when I say that it's almost a pathology running through modern and certainly Western culture is the loss of that. Right. Yeah. So far into separate self and separate identity that we almost can't even relate to the other. And we're seeing that, of course, explode in what's happening with politics, even though we're being manipulated, right? The idea that people literally can't even have conversations about opposing views anymore, right?
Yeah, we really can't. I mean, there's several things I wouldn't even want to bring up necessarily with my best friend or my wife or my family. I mean, it's like I'm afraid that, at these points anyways, we've really reached the point of some sort of some sort of tipping of the scales that, someone can be my friend. In fact, I could love them. And then they might say something like one piece about something, politics or the virus or who
Right.
knows, vaccines or something. And I just think, wow, I really loved you until this second. And now I
Until
don't
this
want to
moment.
even ever talk to you again. Yeah.
It's running rampant. I mean, I live predominantly in, very loosely terms, a spiritual community, meaning people, overall, the people that I associate with are people that are either, doing some kind of spiritual work or psychotherapeutic work. They're in the world of psychedelics, mental health, like yourself, So these are predominantly the people that I am associated with. And I got to tell you, during the last year of COVID and all things related to it, and what's been happening in the political landscape, I've seen those communities and the one that I'm a part of absolutely rupture, fragment, and fall apart.
Isn't that horrible?
And you would think, and I did early on, like, what is all this quote unquote spiritual work you've all been doing been for when you now literally can't even talk to each other? This cancel culture has completely taken place. And then, the extreme version of that is, which you've seen, and a lot of us have lots of articles about, the very bizarre coupling of the spiritual community with the QAnon and far right communities.
Just amazing.
Yeah, it's been really fascinating.
Bizarre, very bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is the next line of thinking here. And thanks for taking us down that, funky, ludicrous, absurd humanity that is eating away at itself while it describes ways to stay alive healthily or something. It's like, whoa. Just an amazing dichotomy of sheer and total mind-boggling, clusterfuck, basically. That's what we got going on. And we're all living that and then finding a space for which not only survival is possible, but for which I can remain. Like whatever this I is, can get some degree of validation that I belong here, that I'm making a difference, that I'm useful, that I'm worth it, that I'm, that people want me or need me, or that I have something to say or something to be or something to do. Boy, that is a challenge. That is a new set of parameters than anything we've ever had to deal with.
It's true. You're talking about going from, surviving to thriving. Yes, right now we're all in survival mode mostly. I mean, like the species, right? And I think beyond levels that we cognize, I think subconsciously most people realize that we're in survival mode, planetary, as a species. And it's too broad and too big to deal with because the way it shows up is personal survival mode. You're just trying to get through the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And what we want to get back to is a place where we're not just surviving, we're actually thriving, And I think, as I mentioned earlier, all of those forces that are kind of evolving and crescendoing and crashing at the moment, and just the long, historical kind of evolution of the mind seems to be erupting in a lot of pathologies, which is, getting into your territory and world work, just kind of neurotic pathological behavior every place, which again probably has its root in a sense of separation and over-identification with the mind and the ego and all these things. And it's just exploding all over the place. Right?
It really is. It's quite a set of fireworks.
Yeah.
Before we get to talk a little bit about what your remarkable personal contribution is to our society and what you really have been doing in these 27 years, because it isn't every day that you just, swallow a couple shot glasses of ayahuasca at all. There's the methodology. There is a contribution that I can't wait to shine a light on for us and our listeners. So before we get there, I want to ask one other question. To me, Tony, and other than Alexandra, my wife, I don't think I've asked anyone this. So, take that into account.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can take this on together. I believe we're at the foothill of this question. So many of our rights have been like restricted or constrained or put aside, or, that we can't go to restaurants. You can't even take a walk. You can't be in open places with people closer to 6 feet to you. You can't this and you can't that. And so many businesses have shut down, and there's just been tragedies at world scale, people who are not recovering from what they no longer can do. And, they don't have their own business. They don't have their own profession. You can't do this. You can't can't do that, you can't do this. All right. There's
Hmm.
a lot of you can't. There's a
Yes,
lot of no.
absolutely.
We don't allow that anymore. We're not allowing that. Synagogues are closed and churches are closed, and any community gatherings are closed, and parties are all suspect, and so much. How in the world, in the face of all that, has there been a resurgence? It appears to be a sanctioned, endorsed, monetized, encouraged resurgence. In the midst of all that, the dispensaries are the only thing open the only thing open in town is the dispensaries, because they must be, one of the essential businesses, the dispensaries, and I suppose the party store. And that's it. That's it. In some of the cities, like in LA, you drive down the street at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. I don't live there anymore, but when I did, it was like, oh yeah, each corner there'd be something lit up. It'd be a green cross on it. It'd be like, oh, that's a dispensary. They're essential. Even the pharmacies close and the dispensaries stay open. And then there's this amazing push to legalize psilocybin therapeutically, or to legalize, to decriminalize, like you were saying, cannabis or ayahuasca on at least a national scale. Do you have a sociological opinion, explanation for, in the midst of all this, how they, whoever they are allowing this or even promoting this to occur? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I've thought about it a lot. And I think the simple answer is that the promise of capitalism in Western culture has failed, right? And I know that sounds
Yeah.
distant from your question, maybe for some people, but it's actually a direct response to your inquiry. For this reason, what we were promised by traditional religion, by the story of America and capitalism, democracy, a better life, a sense of connection and wholeness, and I don't know, all of the promises that those stories promoted has not worked, and it's crashing. It's crashing all around us, and it's taking the environment, the species, and the planet with it. So therefore, people are looking for something that does work. And if you're not looking for something that works because you may not be aware that there's even a problem, you're definitely looking to self-medicate, right? In other words, there is some sense that the world is not quite right, or that you are not quite right, and it's not all working together, right? Maybe the world is out of balance. Maybe I'm out of balance. This thing that I'm watching on Instagram and social media, this life that other people tend to be living, but I'm somehow not living, right? Mm-hmm. All of that is crashing, and it makes perfect sense to me during this time period. Several things are happening, that we're recognizing the actual value of plant medicines and psychedelics, right? Their ability to heal the psyche, and deeper than that. And also in the case of ayahuasca, that at this time period, this phenomenon is happening with ayahuasca, that the vast majority of people cross-culturally that drink it have an experience of the planet itself, nature speaking to them and healing this idea that they are separate from it, right? And they get a profound sense of understanding of what, Rachel Carlson and all of the people like her since then, she wrote Silent Spring, have been saying all along that, look, we're not separate from nature. What you're doing to the planet, you're doing to yourself, right? And this word that is relatively new, I think for a lot of people, sustainability. It's like the way that we are living, particularly in Western culture, which is now the dominant culture exported all over the planet, is literally unsustainable. I think when I hear that word, I wonder what people are hearing when they hear it. It's like, we're not saying it doesn't kind of work. We're saying it's not sustainable, meaning we can't continue to do it. So I feel that is why these things are being relooked at and are resurfacing in popularity. Yeah, and it's so much so that they're being called a renaissance, right? I think it's because it's, as we started off our conversation, bringing it full circle, it seems to be the right medicine at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really does. There is some severe, and to me, astonishing, shocking magic to this being sort of pushed out in front in the midst of, the surging artificial intelligence, or the surging surveillance, or the surging identity identity crisis, or, this whole idea of the conspiracy theories and QAnon and, all the things that are going on. To have this be one of the businesses, if not one of the businesses, that is the most promising into the near future of any business, like if you have a few Bitcoins to put down on something, petting them down on psychedelics is not that bad of a plan right now at all.
As you used the word clusterfuck earlier, and anybody paying half attention to the news, and I mean really the news, not just your bubble of the news that's reinforcing your, story already, the first thing that hits you is what a clusterfuck it all is. And the second thought is, how the heck are we ever going to get out of this? Well, ultimately, it's going to be, as we know, it's not going to happen through grassroots action. It would have happened already, although that's important. It's not going to happen through protests. It's not going to happen through legislation. All those things have to work together. Ultimately, the front lines is actually consciousness. It is going to require a shift in consciousness, probably an army of facilitators that understand that, and through whatever various modalities are appropriate for the particular person or group or facilitator, I think all of that combined is our best line of defense from going over the edge of a cliff. It's literally like starting to heal the pathologies and neuroses that are just running rampant in the psyche of our species. I mean, it's so big, but at the same time, as you know, there's something also profoundly simple about it that's uncanny.
Yeah. I've noticed in some of my more recent growth and development moments or journeys or conversations that once my ego is either allowed or promoted to get out of my way, and once myself is out of the way, and once I start getting the illusions of time and space as being simply illusions, or even the illusions, barely, I know that I might have to eat these words with somebody, but the illusion of life and death, in fact, and getting at least the apparent illusion of that. I know that that doesn't sell to everybody down here, but I think you probably know what I mean. It starts death takes on an entirely different definition when this stuff is incorporated completely.
Yeah, let's take the conversation into that taboo, forbidden territory for a minute, but from a scientific perspective. One of the things we now know, or we think we know, our species, is through, let's say quantum mechanics. We know that the world is an illusion. If for no other reason than it's mostly empty space. And even what we're calling matter, all the matter in the universe as we know it, if you condense it, is the size of a pea, right? And we also know that even that matter is actually not a physical thing. It's an energy event. It's energy vibrating. So we scale that up. And from a very practical point of view, not a metaphoric and a spiritual woo-woo point of view, you can very, I think, maturely say the world as we see it and perceive it is an illusion. And
exactly.
Right. So, and that's let alone I think the next level of that is even the bigger illusion is your story and perception and how you're processing the world is most definitely an illusion because it's unique to you. Right. So in all of those ways combined, and there's more, it's actually safe to say that the world is an illusion. And I'm very unconcerned with people that don't get that, because this is where we're at. I feel the frontier of human consciousness ultimately, and we're talking like the baby frontier, meaning like for the species as a whole, a lot of people get it already. I feel where we're at, and a lot of the confrontation we're seeing erupting from our psyche at the moment is actually this battle between, alluding to what we talked about earlier, between a identification and almost clinging from a fight or flight kind of way to an old worldview and an old way of being, to accepting the reality of what we just spoke about, that in reality, the world is an illusion. And you're really going to have to recalibrate your relationship to life, yourself, who's speaking, identity, religion, God, all of it. And for a lot of people, that's either frightening or just so uncomfortable that they're unwilling. Right?
Yeah.
And it's like, I kind of feel like that's not my problem. And it is my problem at the same time. It's like,
it's essentially, you're backed into the corner of saying that at some point. It's like, if you don't get it, you don't get it. That's fine. I can understand that. It's not my problem. You don't get it. And it's not my problem.
Yeah. And at the same time, it's like, hey, I'm committed to humanity. So yeah, you not getting it is my problem.
Yeah, exactly. It's either like 100% my problem or 0% my problem. And I can't tell really whether it's 100% my problem.
Yeah.
Or if I really got to let you go. That's like, let me know how that works for you.
That's really big, because that's a profound conundrum and kind of paradox that you always, whether you're a bodhisattva, a philosopher, or a scientist, right? When you reach this level of understanding, which I'm not saying is completely unique, right? It's happening everywhere. You move into this challenge of like, well, I kind of now get what's going on and I want to live my place from that place. And you not getting it is not my problem. It's like, oh, but we actually all are connected. The species itself is in danger and you not getting it is my problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not just my problem. It's actually my only
Yeah,
problem
my
in the
only
world.
real concern, right? Everything else is entertainment, but this is a big deal.
Oh my goodness, Tony, that is amazing. And thanks for getting us there. And you start getting, oh, that's something that might come up in my thought process, like, one third of the way into an ayahuasca journey, where I might like get that, start laughing, and then get freaking nauseous. And, like nauseous, like that's a different kind of nausea too. Let's talk about that. That's not your average. I had a bad piece of, that's not an average. I had a bad piece of food nausea that we're talking about there. That is like, okay, are you ready to spit your guts out totally? Because that's what's next. Or, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But you don't want to talk it down. I don't want to scare our listeners, although I think we talked earlier about.
Well, I think there's a difference. It's not about, and I don't feel it's about intimidation or being scared. It's being an adult and being really clear about the weight and the sobriety necessary to face the challenges that we're in, but also if you're going to take on psychedelics or plant medicines as a way to navigate it. It just requires this level of candor and maturity.
It does. And, it does. It does. It's like, people ask, should I do ayahuasca? I'm like, no. And the answer is no, unless you want to. And then definitely.
Absolutely.
It's back to that zero. Should you do ayahuasca? No. No, you shouldn't.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because people ask me all the time, do you think I should do it? I'm like, I can't answer that. There is no should. But I can tell you that if you're drawn to it, I can point you in the right direction, which probably leads us into what you wanted to ask me earlier.
It does. It does. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to, so the right direction is a guide, is a shaman, is a facilitator, is someone there to be with you and see what they see, or maybe what they call ayahuasquerian. Yeah. This is something, do you self-identify?
An ayahuasquero is basically someone that facilitates an ayahuasca experience, but from a tradition of learning. Meaning, if your best friend finds a jar of ayahuasca and leads his friends on a ceremony, you wouldn't call him an ayahuasquero, right? He would just be facilitating that ceremony. An ayahuasquero is someone from any culture that has actually studied and dedicated a good period of their life to understanding basically all that they can in this point in history, particularly from indigenous cultures. And from that place can lead a ceremony with a lot of experience and knowledge of tradition. And I would fall into that category.
You are one of those.
Yeah, people, not a shaman, and we can talk about that. The closest word to me would be an ayahuasquero. And here we have to have a disclaimer. I am not talking about ayahuasca in places where it's illegal, and I don't facilitate in places where it's illegal.
Thank you. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and this is important because people listening will be like, well, this is something I often get when I speak. It's like, oh man, you were so open about what it is that you do. And I'm like, well, actually, I was very clear. I lead ceremonies in places where I can, where people can fly to, and it's completely legal and safe. And I've been involved in that world, both as a student and a facilitator, as I mentioned now, entering 27 years. I have a lot of experience. Mostly, I'm an advocate for the work itself and can direct people often to good places to go relative to their situation. But no, you cannot contact me and say, hey, I heard what you had to say and I'd love to join your group. I'm like, what group?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. People are scratching and listening and learning. I was down in Encinitas, but my goodness, the possibility to use this medication irresponsibly is hair-raising because it is so powerful. And if done irresponsibly, it seems like it doesn't have any of the super high value that we're speaking towards.
No, in fact, it can be detrimental and it put trauma on top of trauma.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. And because, for people that don't understand why, the simple answer is ayahuasca puts you into a very open psychic space, a space of, scientifically, for lack of a better word, neurogenesis, where you're just very, very open and suggestible. Suggestible, is that the word? And yeah, you would want a very mature, trusted facilitator in that space. And in that space, beautiful things can happen. As I mentioned, the default mode network can be disrupted and new possibilities can enter. Well, you wouldn't want to be in that open, space and then have some jerk, downloading their worldview into you, right?
Right.
Or worse.
Exactly.
Yeah, taking advantage of your openness.
Well, I think we're at the space then. If we can talk a little bit about your unique like the things that you would like to shine a light on what you've developed, what, Tony Moss himself has developed, and who else are you known as, and who else do you know yourself as?
Hmm.
That is even over and above ayahuasquero, like you have a contribution, maybe a musical contribution, or you have some sort of, artistic or creative contribution to this world that is really moving the needle forward. Do you like to spend a moment looking at that?
Yeah, in my official bio, it basically says that I combine my passions for art, science, and spirituality to basically do what I do in the world. So I predominantly move in the world as a musician, and the genre of music that I'm in is called medicine music. No brainer. It's music that either is born from or created for use in ceremonial and psychospiritual work, like sessions. So, that is how I move in the world and quote unquote make a living. Also, although I've had very little time for it lately, but have just relaunched hopefully a career in that, I'm also a visual artist. And all of the artwork, of course, is interpretations of the visual terrain or insights that I have gleaned over the years from study of both shamanism, science, and just the human psyche and where those things all crescendo, which is, again, I think the time period that we're in. So the short answer is I move in the world mainly as an artist. And all of my work is a synthesis of those things that I'm passionate about: science, spirituality, and human potential, basically. And what I like to say is that everything that I do is in support of the evolution of human consciousness, because that is just what gets me out of bed in the morning.
In the world of music, in the world of medicine music, I was just thinking about this yesterday. So this is almost for my edification, but I think it's an interesting question. Is the music that you would create for an ayahuasca journey or an ayahuasca weekend, is it fundamentally different than the music you might create for an iboga journey or for a ketamine journey or for a psilocybin journey? Does the medication itself, like the difference between, who knows, Pink Floyd and Johann Bach or something?
Absolutely.
There is a flavor that goes with the actual
Oh,
medicine.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And you bring up something really important. Like, first of all, any music that is healing for you, right, becomes medicine music. Right? If it's not just entertainment, which is fine, and not just, for the rapture and beauty of just how friggin' awesome music is, but it's actually taking you into deeper levels of consciousness or helping to heal some part of your emotional or psychic well-being, sometimes physical. Yeah, then that's just considered medicine music. So in that context, you could listen to, Fleetwood Mac, Stevie Nicks over and over and realize, like, wow, this music is really medicine for me. That would still be in the category of medicine music. Formally, though, however, to answer your question, yeah, once you really understand, here's the thing: each of those medicines or substances, psychedelics, has a specific kind of way of working. They interface with the psyche in a different way, and the journey and the arc of the journey is different. So, yeah, you learn to feel out what music is appropriate for what stage of the journey that particular plant medicine or substance is taking you on. And you learn really quickly, like, oh, well, this particular genre of music really lends itself well for mushroom, or this psilocybin. This really works great for, MDMA or ketamine, this particular playlist. And ayahuasca is very unique. I couldn't discern exactly what it is, but once you have a feel for it, it's like, I know immediately if I'm listening to music, like, that would be a great ceremony song. Like, right, that's going to, and here's the thing, here's a very logical, easy way to look at it. You're in a level of sensitivity, each of those substances. On, let's say, LSD, for instance, you could hear rock and roll and be really attuned to hearing the beauty and the power of that. And like, wow, I've never really gotten how amazing rock is. That would not fly in an ayahuasca ceremony in general, right? There's moments where it could, for sure, but you're so sensitive in that space and you're doing such a deep introspective journey. You want music that is going to facilitate that. And if it has lyrics, you want the lyrics to be beautiful, universal truths, or that are not dogma, not telling you what to do or how to think, but are supporting the process that you're in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, which melodies and the cadence, and, some of them are intentionally sad and emotionally evocative because you want to get people to open up. It's like going to that place you're uncomfortable with. Here's 4 sets of songs that are going to really make you uncomfortable, but they're going to open up the trauma, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It is amazing that, sometimes, so the music, you're right, the difference between music on LSD versus, music with ayahuasca or with ketamine or with psilocybin or iboga or any of the other MDMA, et cetera. It is a different ride, even though we group them as psychedelics. It's not like you're creating just a certain brand that can be, what's the word, can be just cross used in any different.
No, and there's some songs that definitely in the world of medicine music that are just ubiquitously beautiful because of the melody and the lyrics that in any of those sessions could work, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in general, yeah, in terms of a actual playlist for each of those journeys, substances, depending on what you're after, they definitely are tailored for the specific substance.
And do you have offerings? Did you have a playlist of your own, or some of our listeners who are interested in how would we even find out what Tony's creating or what,
It's so interesting. You would think at this point that I would have an actual playlist in place. I don't, and that's mainly just because I'm always using it for my own personal, creative work, or the rare chances that I actually get to lead ceremony. But in general, my work, what I'm about, everything from public speaking, live events, the music I record, it's all, I wanted to make it easy. So it's tonymoss.me. That's it. Yeah, TONYMOS.me. Yeah.
.me. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that just has everything that I'm kind of up to at any given moment. I just list kind of in the same place. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So how would people get a hold of you if they wanted to follow you? Maybe, if they wanted to perhaps contact you or at least see what you're up to, or maybe learn from you or collaborate?
Yeah, I can be reached through that website, but also I'm on Instagram as Moss Tony, just my name backwards because somebody used it already. And one of our relatives took my name before I got to it. Yeah,
one of our relatives. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's Moss Tony on Instagram. People find me there. And I'm also Tony Moss, easy to find my picture, black guy with dreads on Facebook. And there are several Tony Mosses, surprisingly, that are, to my surprise, kind of doing similar work. Not in the world of plant medicines, but like artists and musicians. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So we collide occasionally, which is, I was completely surprised when that started happening. What would happen is somebody would tag me and, hey, new song by Tony Moss. I'm like, huh? And it was like some other Tony Moss recording.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
It is. I thought the name was more unique than it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe Fred Moss is slightly more unique than Tony Moss, but it's only slight. And I only know a little bit about some of the Fred Mosses out there, but that we'll use that for the next podcast.
Exactly.
Guess. All right. Well, Tony, it has been a magical, remarkable conversation. And look up, it's already been 59
minutes. I know.
Minutes.
Can you believe it? Wow.
It's quite amazing. And, and had we been on ayahuasca, we would have felt like,
well,
like not even years, right?
It would have felt like hours or a few seconds, depending.
Yeah. Depending on how you peek at it. Yeah. Time surely is bendable.
Yes,
let's put it that
sure.
way. Surely is bendable. Okay, it has been really great. Is there anything you want to add? Maybe you might have missed, or you just want to say something to our listeners, to me, for you, declare something, a dream, a future, anything at all?
I think the only thing I would reiterate is something that came up subtly in our conversation, that ayahuasca isn't quote unquote for everybody. Right? It's not a panacea. None of the psychedelics are.
No, it's really not.
Yeah, none of them are. However, if from listening to this or from research that you've done or exposure stories that you heard, if you feel drawn to it and you feel like a deep intuitive, like, I think this could help me, or I think I want to, explore, then by all means, you do what the rest of us do. You have to find credible sources. And the easiest way to do that on the internet is like everything else. You have to look for reviews, look for either facilitators or retreat centers that actually have reviews of people that have had really beautiful experiences, and the facilitators have a history of study, and, go for it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's exactly how I would put it too. And, I think that if you're drawn to it, then follow that drawing. And until you're drawn to it, it's probably okay to say, no, it's not a panacea by any stretch of the imagination.
But here's what I say. And final thing, if you're not drawn to it, be open to the fact that it's helping other people so you can release your judgment about it. Right. And just realize it may not be for you. However, if you are, be adult and responsible in how you approach it.
That's well said. Thank you so much, Tony Moss. So So, Tony, it has indeed been the level of honor, even beyond the level of honor I suspected it might be, to speak with you openly about this sensitive, timely, like front edge, front burner topic that is really, at least in the world of what we're living in now, it's compelling to say the very least. And it's, I don't know, magnetizing for me. I find myself being really deeply interested in the impact that this, one of the few things out here that we can explore freely in the present times, and that the impact of really realtering and reconfiguring and recontextualizing the world around us so that we can really make the world a better place. Like, it's pretty amazing that that's what's here.
Absolutely. And I would say, will psychedelics and ayahuasca heal the psyche? No one can say. Can it? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Even collectively.
Mm-hmm.
You might be along for the ride without ever having to take any. It's like that too.
Exactly. Bingo. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been a delight not only just getting to connect with you through this process, but specifically at being in conversation with you around things that I think not only are, as you said, engaging, that I'm passionate about, but also I think are important for the times that we're in. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And for you out here, for those of you who have been around for the whole hour and 3 minutes of this conversation, thank you for staying around for as long as you did. And we now have the contact information for my brother, Tony Moss. And it's just been a deep honor. And I thank you so much for coming on, for setting this up, for having our conversations, and for what is likely to be a lifelong friendship. It is just a pleasure to finally meet you, to get to know you, and to walk this world for you. So
likewise.
Thank you for being here, Tony Moss. Thank you. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great rest of the day, great rest of the week, and we'll catch you on the next episode on the flip side. Bye for now. Love you, and welcome to humanity.
Hey, welcome to Humanity, family. It's Ryan Levesque here, co-producer of the show. I truly hope you enjoyed Dr. Fred's in-depth conversation today. If you did, and if the conversations we share each week are making a difference for you, could you please take just a moment to leave a rating and a short review on Apple Podcasts? Your enthusiastic review helps new listeners discover the show. Your support here really does make a difference. I'd also like to invite you to reach out to a friend or two who would appreciate today's episode. Maybe shoot them a quick text or email, or maybe pick up the phone and invite them to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast so they can be enriched from the discovery of amazing ideas and insights each week. As always, you can find past episodes along with the complete show notes and links at welcometohumanity.net/podcast. If you'd like to explore how working one-on-one with Dr. Fred can help you break through whatever challenges you might be facing with your mental health or well-being, leading to new levels of freedom and vitality, I invite you to reach out to us directly by emailing Dr. Fred at welcometohumanity.net. That's DRFRED at welcometohumanity.net. Thanks so much for listening, and keep an ear out for another captivating conversation next week. Have a beautiful day, a beautiful week, and indeed, a beautiful life. Welcome to humanity.